TITV Insider TV will continue in just a moment, but first I want to talk to you about Nuke's Express Cafe, 205 University Boulevard East in Tuscaloosa, just up from the UA campus, right there close to the softball facility, the tennis complex, the recreation center. Students love it, but so do people like myself, because every time I go in there, I can get something different and my taste buds are always satisfied. That's because all the ingredients are fresh, whether it's one of those oven toasted sandwiches or a California style pizza, a hand tossed salad, fresh ingredients, great dessert menu as well. I try not to give in and have dessert, but every so often I have to. They're open 7 days a week for lunch and dinner. Just like myself, if you try it once, you'll go back again and again. That's Nuke's Express Cafe. Call them for your catering needs as well. University Boulevard in Tuscaloosa. Well, it was a heartbreaking end to an otherwise great season for the Alabama softball team. The Crimson Tide literally 1 out away from moving on to the College World Series in Oklahoma City when Jenna Rodriguez broke hearts, hitting her second home run of the day. A 2-run walk-off blast to give Hawaii the 5-4 victory. She was responsible for all 5 runs. Alabama's season came to a screeching, painful halt.
You know, I thought we had so much fight in us, and we didn't give up, and you know, we got a key hit, and then you know, stuff happens. So
I don't think we should hang our heads at all. We worked hard in that game. We came back. We fought. We never gave up. And you know what? One pitch, they got the lucky hit.
You know, there's not anybody that I would trade on this team for anybody, and you usually don't say that after a year. It's rare, and they're just great kids, and I think they overachieved by working hard.
And this is 2 years in a row that the softball team has just had its guts pulled out in heartbreaking, gut-wrenching fashion. Last year at the College World Series, they lost to Florida on a 2-out walk-off grand slam. This year in the Super Regional, this has been a great program. This was a terrific team, Rodney, and I think that even though there's disappointment in not making it back to the World Series, going for the 7th time, you have to remember this team won the SEC regular season and tournament championships. We follow sports in this league. We know how difficult that is to do, and that's what this team should be remembered for.
Well, it should also be remembered for overcoming adversity with having to replace so much experience from last year.
7 new position players.
Yeah, they've had a lot of players. We talked to Coach Murphy here live on the show. He talked about having to replace all those guys and how difficult it was early in the year, and then all of a sudden they found their groove and started playing extremely well. As you mentioned, Gary, they won the SEC regular season and the tournament championships. Again, I know it's extremely disappointing because they wanted to make it back to Omaha, and or rather the College World Series in Oklahoma City, and but when you look at it, Gary, they had an extraordinary season,
and they're going to be loaded again next year. And one other quick note on Patrick Murphy, the class act that he is. In post media conference following that game, he was disappointed. He showed class, congratulated Hawaii, a team that went out of their way. They had a big chip on their shoulder. They went out of their way to try and not show Alabama respect, to make the point that they felt like they were going to win. And I know that they didn't mean it necessarily as badly as it came off, but for them to kind of carry themselves the way they did, never want to give Alabama any credit, and then for Alabama's Pat Murphy to come in there, and the first thing he did was congratulate Hawaii. That shows his class, and it rubs off on that entire program, and they will be back. Well, up next on TITV Insider TV, Rodney has this week's recruiting update, some names that you'll recognize, and maybe a couple of others that you don't know about. Plus, we'll get to your phone calls and emails. Again, there's the information on the screen to get in touch with us. You're watching TITV Insider Television, live from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And we're back on TITV. I'm Gary Harris, the man with the plan, Rodney Orr right next to me, and it's time to talk, I'd say this is one of your favorite subjects, football recruiting, and we want to update everybody on Spencer Region, the gigantic offensive guard out of Coleman High School. We know his story well. We covered it. When everybody thought he was going to Alabama, he committed to Auburn, a little bit of confusion over what happened, but now he's back decommitted, looking at a lot of different schools, and certainly Alabama is at the top of the list right now as far as schools that Spencer is considering.
Yeah, Gary, certainly Alabama, and there's several other schools in the mix there, and Spencer apparently going to take his time. And let's be honest, Gary, on this show and on TITVinsider.com, even when he committed to Auburn in that surprise commitment, we've always been very respectful of Spencer Region and said what a good kid he is, and certainly we wish him well in whatever he decides to do, but Alabama is certainly one of the schools that top his list.
Well, I've said all along his size is impressive, and not that there aren't a lot of big high school football players that get college scholarships, but he is huge. and he describes himself as a mauler, and I think that's probably what he projects as a guard. Probably not going to be looked at as tackle. A 6'6", 325, 30-pound guard that comes off the football, fires out, and pops a big defensive tackle right in the mouth. Wouldn't you say that's his strength?
Yep, you can see him as a right guard possibly, Gary, alongside maybe someday DJ Fluker.
Well, someday, if he comes to Alabama, he could be blocking for one of the best high school running backs in the country. Isaiah Crowell, I say Crowell, you say Crowell, somebody else may say Crowell, but I'll say Crowell. The running back out of Columbus, Georgia, 205 pounds. It's hard to say who's the best running back in the country, but certainly this young man is in the conversation, Rodney.
Yeah, he's a tremendous back, Gary, no question about that. I think he fits Alabama's offense very, very well. Would fit into that, Trent Richardson, Mark Ingram mold. And I think Alabama and Georgia are his top 10. In fact, you told us that last week. Now, and again, he grew up a Georgia fan, so I think they certainly have an outstanding shot at getting him. But then again, I think Alabama has been a team that has done a very good job of recruiting him for a long time. So it's a long way away. We'll see what happens.
Since Nick Saban's arrived at Alabama, I think you can make the argument that the Crimson Tide has recruited linebackers better than any school in the country. A top prospect this year for the class of 2011 that Alabama's looking at, Curtis Grant out of Richmond, Virginia.
Fell in love with Alabama's defense last year, Gary, watching them, and he can tell you all the players' names through watching every single Alabama game on TV last year. And I think Alabama has a chance with Curtis Grant. Again, he's highly recruited. A lot of schools after him, including Florida, among many others, and he's going to take some visits this summer, and we'll see what happens with him. But again, he is an outstanding player, and Alabama definitely has a shot with Curtis Grant.
And looking ahead to the class of 2012, Derek David from Texas, one of the top young linebackers in that class.
Yes, he is, from Rockdale, Texas, only 45 minutes from Austin. You would think maybe he would be a lock for the Texas Longhorns, but that's not necessarily the case. Talked to Derek and his coach in the past week, and I know he has family in Montgomery, and he's very high on Alabama. Again, just like Curtis Grant, he's a guy that watched Alabama on TV last year, kind of started falling for the Tide then, watching that defense, and he really likes Alabama.
And some will tell you that this young man on your screen right now is the top prospect in the country for 2011. Now, a lot of people fall recruiting say he's a must-get for Steve Spurrier, but that doesn't mean that Alabama and others aren't chasing him.
Well, Alabama's certainly very strongly in the mix for this guy, and a lot of people think he's, as you mentioned, the #1 prospect in the country. And you look at Alabama, FSU, LSU, South Carolina, Clemson, they're in the mix, USC, Miami. Those are probably the primary schools along with North Carolina. Now, one thing that he likes about Alabama that maybe some of the others don't do, when you look at style of defense, Alabama runs that 3-4 defense where he could line up at the jack position, Gary, and that's probably where he would fit in best.
And finally, our last update on Crowell's teammate, Gabe Wright, big defensive tackle, defensive end type out of Columbus as well. Obviously, since he's a teammate of Crowell. Alabama's been on him a long time, but I tell you, Auburn's pushing hard.
Auburn has pushed hard. Tracy Rocker, the defensive line coach there at Auburn, has done a very good job in not only recruiting Gabe, but making his mother feel very comfortable about their program. And I think that you'll see Gabe and his mom come over for a visit sometime this summer here to Alabama. Alabama's certainly in good position with Gabe as well. You mentioned Auburn, and Georgia's always been a team that's been on his list too.
All right, that's our recruiting update for this week. I know we've got some phone callers holding. Stay patient. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back with phone calls. Thanks, Rodney, for a great update. We'll be back with calls and emails right after this.